Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Policy Beats. Today we are here with a very special guest, Mr. Daniel Castro, who is the Vice President at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. He is an expert US speaker, but he is not a US government employee. Thank you so much, sir, for actually taking out the time for this discussion. How do you feel, and if this is your first time in Pakistan, we'd love to know your thoughts.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me here today and having me part of IFPRI's Policy Beats program. I'm excited to be here and having these conversations with a whole range of experts here in Pakistan about the future, really, of the digital economy and how the country plans to address both the challenge it's facing today, but also thinking about how it advances the economy for the future.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I'm not sure how much, you've interacted with them when it comes to Pakistan and the digital infrastructure regarding it. But, we are curious to learn more about what's going on in the US regarding the digital the technology policy space, and in general, how we're going to see the future of technology and the global trends that are, surrounding it. So, my first question to you would be, sir, what are some of the most transformative technologies that are currently shaping the future of different industries, and how do you think they differ across, various sectors, and what's the kind of role that you play at your office regarding these?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if we look back just at the history of digital technologies, we've seen these waves of innovation occur. We had, everything from the mainframe, 60s and 70s. We had, the first kind of networked computers, desktop computers. We had the internet, which is, of course, has shaped, the economy we're in today. All of the kind of data-driven innovation we've seen with cloud computing. And now we have artificial intelligence. And AI is really this powerful force that's reshaping the global economy. And this is something that I think every country is really wrestling with. How will AI not only affect the day-to-day operations and how we learn and live our lives, but also how it's going to affect the global economy and how it's going to create so much disruption in different sectors, but also create massive opportunities. There's a global reshuffling going on right now as countries think about how can they make their sectors the most competitive. And the ones who I think will be most successful are those that adopt AI. So in the United States, this is something that's been dominating the tech policy discussions over the last few years. We had the US Senate go through a whole process, these set of bipartisan AI dialogues where they brought in experts after experts to really go in and dig deep on all the different areas that AI is having an impact, thinking about everything from privacy concerns and bias, thinking about how it will impact jobs, global trade, national security, and coming up with a bipartisan plan on how we can move forward in these areas. And this is something I participated in some of those workshops, got to see kind of firsthand how many, we rarely see legislators, these are experienced, policy professionals, usually quite older, aren't necessarily the typically digital literate people you think about, but really digging deep into these emerging technologies and really thinking about what we need to do next. And they understand you have to invest in infrastructure, you have to invest in data, you have to invest in people. And so I think, right now, a lot of the policy is really focused on how do we do more of that? How do we create, these open platforms for innovation, which is really key towards, moving forward in the future.
That's interesting. I'm also curious to know what are the major challenges when it comes to, pitching a certain policy, or let's just say, one of the most common concerns for any layperson would be their job security. And when we speak of AI inclusion in the workforce, a lot of people tend to, sit at the fence regarding it because they're just so concerned whether this is going to take away their livelihoods. So how do you then how do you see AI and machine learning impacting, employment trends, and what sort of a role do you expect from government or other stakeholders, to play when it comes to reskilling this workforce and also then establishing a policy that safeguards or values people's concerns?
Right. We did a survey earlier this year, a national representative survey, asking Americans about lots of dimensions of AI, both where their concerns were and where they thought the opportunities lie. When we asked them about jobs and how they thought AI would impact their future, most people were actually pretty positive, but they were much more positive about how it helped their children.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So everyone really understands that long term, we need AI. It's going to increase productivity. It'll also lead to better jobs. When we talk about the use of AI for automation, we're getting rid of the dirty, dull, dangerous parts of jobs. That's a good thing. It's going to lead to higher paid work. It's going to lead to better work. But there will be a transition in the process, and I think that's where you need to think about what are the strong safety nets. So when people are affected by changes in jobs, they can have that unemployment insurance if they need. They can get back on their feet, but also that long term about how do we reskill people. And this isn't something that's going to happen just once. Reskilling is now something, and upskilling is something that we have to think about through the lifetime of a worker. It's not, in the past you would maybe go and you'd get a degree or you'd get skilled in a trade, and that's all you need to know for the rest of your life. That was the rest of your career. That's not how it is anymore, right?
Exactly.
You go to school and you learn some basics, you learn to be a good analytical thinker, maybe a good creative thinker. You have to continue to learn more and get new credentials. It's usually micro credentials at shorter term. We have to think about how we changed even the educational environment to do that, right? Because it's not about giving someone a 4-year college degree program and support. You have to think about, okay, it might be a working mother who still needs to go and get credentials. It might be someone who's maybe on their second career and they're having to relearn, how they're going to use AI or some of these other digital tools in these new areas. And we have to make sure that people are also comfortable with learning. And I think some of that is culture, but some of that is really going to be policy that says just from the top down, this is the direction we're going, and encouraging it, welcoming it, making it integrated so it's really part of the entire fabric. And I think once we get that type of environment and that type of commitment from the government, then you have people who aren't so worried about how it's going to affect them in the short term, because they say, it doesn't matter if the job I'm doing today changes in the future, because I know I don't want the same job. I want to be continuing to increase my skills. I want to be looking for better work, and that will be a good thing. And I heard sometimes it's the labor unions that are opposed to these changes because, especially when they see automation, they think it might hurt them. But what was really interesting, and one of the dialogues I heard from a labor union leader in one of the Nordic countries, they said, our workers actually don't fear new technology, we fear old technology. And we fear old technology because we know, we're not going to be doing our jobs as well. It's probably going to be less safe. We want the new technology. I think that's the perspective we need to get to. We want the new technology.
I think that's a very interesting thing to note, because a lot of the narrative around anything new that shows up, people are initially going to, be a little taken aback by what that certain technology is, or whatever that new novel thing that the government or the industries introduce. So essentially then working on their mindsets and preparing them, the preparedness in terms of education, and indulging them that this is something good for them. That sort of a narrative would probably help ease these concerns. And I think we relate that for Pakistan as well, because we are still, figuring out our level of digital transformation and technological advancements. And then there's the other side of the world that's advancing so fast. So, but yeah, that was a very interesting take. I will move on to a different question now, and that has to do with blockchain and Web3, because that too was like a buzzword for a while now. And my question is then, how are technologies like these, like blockchain, shaping certain paradigms of digital ownership? And what sort of implications do you think this would have on global economic models? Particularly, what sort of impact have you all witnessed within the US?
Yeah, so I think this is an area that so many policymakers are struggling with. One, understanding. I mean, we've had so many now with cryptocurrencies in the news. They get excited about it, but then they also get scared. I mean, they see what happens when people lose their money. And I think the primary focus on most regulators I've seen in the short term is, how do we protect consumers? How do we make sure that consumers are not being defrauded, either by being basically sold something that's worthless or that's misleading, or that these various cryptocurrency or blockchain NFT type solutions are really masquerading fraud or something that would be illegal, even if you didn't wrap it around kind of crypto buzzwords. So I think that's the short-term focus. But long-term, I mean, it is changing how we think about ownership of digital products, how we think about the role of various intermediaries. One of the powerful things that Web3 does is it really allows you to rethink how information and power is organized. You can get rid of so many intermediaries, and that creates opportunities for empowerment at the user level. It creates opportunities to challenge the status quo. And so I think that's what's really interesting. I've done a lot of research looking at the metaverse, right? This idea of the next generation of the internet that will be fully immersive, that will be more about spatial computing, that will involve these Web3 issues. And that's where there's also new opportunities to create a whole new creator economy, where people can buy and sell digital goods. You think about tourism today, where you travel someplace and you might buy a souvenir that was made there. What if you could do that in a completely virtual environment? What if you could visit the pyramids in Egypt, but also buy something from a local vendor there? And what does that look like, and how does ownership look like? But when you start entering that space, all of those long-standing issues that we've dealt with in the global international environment, things like intellectual property issues and counterfeits. What happens if somebody's selling a fake Gucci bag, at the pyramids there? I mean, that's where these issues show up, and we come down to the core issues that we still have laws online, right? You still have to enforce these laws and figure out how to do that, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't break innovation. I think that's one of these core messages that policymakers always have to remember. New technologies are going to continue to come up. We are going to continue to have to enforce existing norms, but you can't just say that we're going to shut down technology, or we're going to stop this innovation because it threatens maybe the current status quo. You have to evolve with it.
You touched upon a few things that I actually had questions on, also especially related to the intellectual property. How does one see the evolution of the proper intellectual property rights in this particular context? Because when you have technological advancements and proliferation of digital content, I was going to come to that, but you've answered some of it. I would then like to know, with your experience, I'm assuming you also have a good enough experience in dealing with issues pertaining to internet governance. Then how do you perceive this balance between regulation and innovation in maintaining an open access to the internet? And basically, what are the efforts that currently are taking place on your side of the world, and versus what's going on globally, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think a free and open internet is crucial not only to kind of democratic flourishing and the exchange of free ideas, but it's also central to economic growth and progress. The access to the internet, we've seen time and again, is what leads to growth in GDP. It leads to increases in productivity. It leads to trade and services, increased exports, higher wages. I mean, it's what has created economic opportunity after opportunity for so many countries, and certainly the United States has benefited from it. Much of the very highly developed countries have, but also so has all of the world. Every country that's pursued connectivity has seen those benefits. I think the challenges we've seen is that it's taken a while sometimes for policymakers to always recognize that internet connectivity is a core infrastructure, just like water, just like power, just like roads. They have to be open, they have to be reliable, they have to be usable for commerce. Okay. And so, that means, we can't shut them down, we can't have blockages. It doesn't mean, that sometimes there aren't, illegal activities that happen online, and that there needs to be policies to respond to those illegal activities. I think sometimes people take internet freedom to a maximalist position, which is never the goal of it. It's not to say that, you can have illegal content online, just like we don't want illegal content offline. We want to stop that. But what we do say is that you have to use targeted interventions that actually go after specific content or specific harmful products or services, and not going after large-scale issues. In the United States, one of the issues that we've dealt with a lot is online piracy. How do we stop that? And that's a perfect example of where the answer wasn't to shut down entire services. It was to say, okay, we go after the bad actors, users who are buying or selling illegal activity, and stopping that. And then there are so many other areas too where we have to think about what kind of message does this send to companies that are trying to create, or to companies that are trying to figure out where they want to invest in the next generation of digital technologies? And just like when you have companies that are looking at who has the best roads, who has the best banks, financial systems, people are looking at who has the best internet, not only in terms of connectivity, but in terms of reliability and stability. I think that's an issue that comes up again and again.
Interesting. So from a national security perspective now, and of course technology, as we see within the international relations domain and geopolitics, we're seeing it become one of the most intriguing and also sort of a crucial component of within that particular discourse as well. Rather, if I may say, it's like the superstructure of all competition right now. And so what I would like to know is your perspective on what sort of role do you see for technology in bridging or widening these gaps between countries, especially between the global north and the global south. The digital divide, I feel like it already exists on such a large scale, even within the country, at least our country. I can't say that for the US, of course, but I'm really curious to know, how do you see this pan out on the global platform,
right.
Where we get to hear a lot about the US versus China, a technologically driven world with Chinese characteristics or US characteristics. There's a lot of debate and discourse on that as well.
Right. Well, I do think one thing that's important to note is that the advancement of AI is actually helping close the digital divide in ways that I don't think people really even imagine that this would be one of the ways we address this problem, right? Okay. If you think about all the people who couldn't get online simply because they weren't literate, and now we have the ability to talk to an AI agent directly on your phone, and you have access now to the entire internet. You have access to expert information just through a conversational app. That's increasing digital access in ways that we weren't thinking about. It's leapfrogging things, and so I think we have to recognize that there are these just radical innovations that will substantially increase and address problems that we've seen in the past. On the bigger picture point, I think though about how competition around digital advancement, digital technology, I mean, it's a national security issue, it's an economic security issue. It's definitely where I think we are seeing these great powers challenge each other and compete. And it's also though opening the door, I think, for not just a fight about the hegemonic powers and who will lead there, but also about the role of the rest of the world for a few reasons. One, much of this technology, it's collaborative, right? When you think about how AI is being developed, it's being trained on global data. It's not being trained on data just from one country. When we're talking about fine-tuning these models and creating country-specific solutions, this is where countries are taking their these open models, for example, and really customizing them, personalizing them to their own use cases. I think that's really powerful too, because we're not in the past, if you thought about like computing technology and internet, to replicate what an advanced country did required massive investment. No country has to replicate what OpenAI did with ChatGPT. They can just go online and use it.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's really powerful, where the technology is scalable because it's software now. It's not just hardware.
On the software note, I was going to come to the cybersecurity element of it. In recent past, we have seen, the use of cyber warfare, and of course, with anything that's tech, you are going to start to see it sort of spread out in different domains as well. And so, based on your experience, I don't know if this is like a very micro question, but auditing ID security at federal agencies, what are the emerging cybersecurity threats, and how should organizations or governments then prepare to mitigate that particular threat as well?
Right. Well, AI is also creating all these new threats, and it's exacerbating the ones that we already have. So some of the big ones, I mean, we know about, right? We know that there are software vulnerabilities and the need to be able to do change management in complex systems and figure out how to do that effectively, how to do effective risk assessment, how to look at the interconnectedness of different systems and the dependencies that are created there and respond to those risks. None of that has changed, and I think there's just more and more complexity. We have a workforce shortage in cybersecurity globally, right? And we have to figure out how to close that gap. And AI might also be one way to close some of that by augmenting and automating certain tasks that IT workers are doing. But the challenge I think that we see right now is that the attackers, they're all using AI today. There's no barrier to them using it. The defenders are much slower. Right, it's much slower for defenders to start adopting AI. One, because there's just lack of investment in security in general. That's not always where the AI skills actually exist in the cybersecurity teams. So there's this disadvantage I think we're at, and in the short term, that poses significant risk for government agencies that are having to defend their networks, but also government agencies that are thinking about cybersecurity just for the national economy and the role that they're going to play in helping address all the ransomware attacks, denial of service attacks, all of the fraud basically that's going to be occurring. There's been a number of high-profile stories earlier this year about attackers, for example, using AI-generated voices and video to do these types of fraudulent attacks on businesses.
Absolutely.
Can have a hugely damaging effect, and we're seeing that they're highly effective because they're a new type of attack that people aren't used to. And so some of that is also this education and awareness that needs to go on. Just like we've done a lot of cybersecurity training in the past around phishing emails, now we have to start thinking about phishing calls and phishing video calls and how to recognize and respond to those as well.
That's quite interesting. But now I want to ask you something that personally, and also because you're someone who's like an innovation leader, you're able to see these trends, see these projections. What is by far, the most exciting technology that you think remains under-discussed, and why should we pay more attention to it?
Yeah. Well, I won't say AI is under-discussed, but that's still the one that I'm most excited about. But I think one that's maybe underappreciated a little bit is the augmented reality and where that's going. I had the opportunity to try the new, not only just what Meta's, they haven't released it, but it's their development product where they are using these glasses that you can really add on, right? So you see in your space, you can see a TV, you can play a game, you can interact. And if you imagine that on a social level, imagine walking down the street, looking at a restaurant and being able to see the menu and the prices immediately, being able to see the reviews about it, being able to just have access to any kind of information or entertainment at your fingertips, but also be able to summarize your day based on what you've seen and heard, basically having an assistant with you at all times. I think this technology is incredibly powerful. It's this idea of spatial computing. It's the idea of a personal assistant that's with you at all times. It's the idea of basically wearable AI and AI that's integrated into your daily life, but through these types of devices. We're still, I think, quite a ways away in terms of the technology reaching a price point that is affordable at a large scale. But we know that type of innovation occurs. I mean, if you look at where cell phones were in the 90s or 80s, I mean, the technology was starting to get there, but it was, way too expensive. But we've seen how far it's come in just a short period of time. I think that's where we are right now with some of this augmented reality, virtual reality. It's expensive, it's clunky right now, it's not for mass use. We can see the future and where it's going. And I think that's really exciting.
No, that's quite interesting. Actually, over here we have, I'd just like to share something regarding AGR. We have a small startup of sorts. It's run by this amazing girl called Komal, and she basically focuses on folklore in Pakistan, and she has been trying to make use of AGR and AI to sort of bring stories to life for the Pakistani culture. And I feel like that's one of the elements that the softer parts, and also like you mentioned, creator economy. It also relates to that, and how we can sort of use these platforms for other purposes as well, just the softer version of ourselves as well. So it just reminded me of that. But no, you're absolutely right. The discourse around artificial intelligence and quantum computing, it's just so overpowering these days that you end up missing out on discussing, things like these. At least in policy circles, people tend to forget this part on our end. I obviously can't say anything about the other side. And lastly, just conclusively, since I know you'll be speaking at the conference later today as well, could you give us some projection about where United States will be heading in terms of its technology policies, and how does that impact certain global patterns or global trends? What are the core issues that the country would focus when it comes to its national security concerns, and how much technology can one share? We know that the United States is the hub of innovation, the Silicon Valley. You get to hear all sorts of amazing things about the technological advancements that are taking place over there. But at the same time, we also hear things like, on the other side, some countries are advancing, beyond that scope as well, and we get to hear China's name regarding it. So just your thoughts on where we're heading in this particular space in the next few years. And with that, we will conclude our discussion.
Yeah, I think what every country needs to recognize is that China is trying to compete, not just to compete as every country does and tries to succeed. They're trying to dominate all the advanced industries, including the ones that other countries are leading in, and they're using AI, they're using government power to do that. And I think that concerns a lot of people, especially those who are concerned about democratic norms and what that looks like in terms of future geopolitical power. And that's why the United States, I think, is trying to build this global coalition of countries that are committed to these ideas of freedom and openness, and it's collaborative innovation. When I hear some of the leaders, U.S. companies, tech companies, talking about the work they're doing, first of all, they're not just doing it in the U.S., even though they're U.S. companies. These are companies that have employees and facilities globally, and they have global partners, and they're looking for global ideas. They're also thinking about basically, how does this technology impact the world in positive ways? We just saw the Nobel Prizes go out to all around AI in these key areas this past year. And I think that's the opportunities that we have to recognize, that even when we have countries that are geopolitical rivals, like between the United States and China right now, we still have the same interest in terms of solving global health issues. We still have the same interest in terms of solving climate change and thinking about these types of challenges ahead. And I think that's where we have to make sure that those rivalries aren't what we're leading with. We're leading with the solutions, and we're leading with how we work together in certain of these areas. And so I think that will be something we continue to balance. National security issues continue to come up. Some of these other issues continue to come up.
Right.
But these are dual-use technologies. Yes, they have military applications, but they have enormous economic and societal implications as well. And all of that continues to be open, available for everyone to innovate with. And I think that's what's really powerful in this space, is if you look at some of these models, they're open models. Anyone can access and download them, create their own. And that's leading to just waves of innovation, not only in how you deploy it, how these are developed, how they're refined, but also how they're improved in terms of their safety. There's lots of open innovation there. So I think it's really powerful and kind of exciting time to be engaged in these tech policy issues. The issues aren't necessarily all new, but we are facing new challenges in terms of how we come together and solve these issues.
No, that's quite interesting, and I hope that as technology advances, we're able to make the best use of it. And of course, every time something new comes in to this particular landscape, there's a lot of discourse about it, a lot of conversation on how do you make the best use of it. And with that being said, thank you so much, Mr. Daniel, for taking out the time for this conversation. I would like to learn a lot more from you in a lot of depth, but I know that since you'll be speaking later at the conference, just really looking forward to hearing your thoughts then on the subject that you have prepared. So thank you so much once again.
Right, thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into Policy Beats. We'll see you again on another episode.